Before we get started with announcing the panelists and the moderator, I just would like to recognize all of the students and all of the workers who worked so hard and for so long to make this conference possible. If you had a hand in preparing this, please take a stand for all the students. Rose. Charles Mills, who is a philosopher, wrote a book called The Racial Contract. In one opening page of the book, he said, "The unnamed political system that made the modern world what it is today is white supremacy." And this People's Assembly is going to speak on that topic, challenging white supremacy, the black radical view. We couldn't be more honored to have such esteemed panelists, Robin Kelly, Jamala Rogers, and Umi Sela. Give a round of applause. And the moderator for this panel is Walter Smolarek. And I first met Walter in the radical philosophy circle, and this brother started talking about Mao Zedong. I said, this is a bad brother right here. Walter is, without a doubt, a former student of Dr. Anthony Montero and a member of the coalition demanding his reinstatement right here at Temple University. He is also a member of the conference steering and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Without further ado, let's welcome Walter Smolarek.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited for this panel. We're honored to have Umi Sela, Jamala Rogers, and Robin D.G. Kelly. Umi is the co-founder of the Dream Defenders, a youth coalition based in Florida. A round of applause. And he'll tell you a lot more about the work that they've been doing. Jamala Rogers is a leading organizer with the Organization for Black Struggle in St. Louis. Her new book is called Ferguson is America, Roots of Rebellion, and I highly recommend this book. There's going to be a signing at Black & Noble Books at Broad and Erie on Tuesday, January 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. And then finally we have Robin Kelly, who, all of these people need no introduction, right? Let's just give it up. For Robin Kelly, just to list some of his more popular titles, he's written Hammer and Hoe, Alabama Communists During the Great Depression. Race Rebels, Culture, Politics, and the Black Working Class, and Freedom Dreams, the Black Radical Imagination. Let's give him a round of applause, please. The people of Ferguson and Baltimore and cities across the country have profoundly challenged the system. The state's response, brute force, media demonization, and co-option are very familiar, but in recent months, we've witnessed a new and alarming trend. White supremacy has taken a turn towards outright fascism. The Trump campaign is the most visible manifestation of this, and now we have the militia takeover in Oregon. But this isn't just the result of elite decision-making, and in fact, the leadership of the Republican Party is mortified at the possibility of Trump winning the campaign. And I agree with Vijay Prashad that Trump is in many ways the personification of what the ruling class is or what they would like to be. But I do think that there is a large sector of the ruling class that has some semblance of an understanding of the limitations of their own power, and Trump scares them too. White supremacy's fascist turn is in large part an adaptation to structural changes to the institution of whiteness itself. I want to open this People's Assembly by just briefly noting some of these dynamics. We're now entering the 9th year of capitalist crisis and stagnation. Some years have been better than others, but there has been no recovery since the Great Recession of 2008. This problem has been compounded by negative international trends for the advanced imperialist countries, especially the United States. After the end of the Cold War, the managers of U.S. imperialism harbored illusions of a new American century. Marco Rubio even made that his campaign slogan, of unquestionable U.S. domination. But the military defeat suffered by U.S. imperialism at the hands of the heroic Iraqi resistance, I think we should give a round of applause for the Iraqi resistance for stopping U.S. imperialism in their tracks and showing that this monster can be stopped. The rise of new economic powerhouses like the BRICS nations represent an alternative anchor for global growth and stability. And although the end of the commodities boom has caused major difficulties, these states are pressing forward with global institutions like the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement that challenge the U.S.-dominated architecture of international relations. Now, a loyal white population has served as a very effective insurance policy for the rulers of this country for a very long time. But with a myriad economic, political, and military dilemmas facing the ruling class, this social contract is being stretched to the limit. Comfortable white people are just too expensive nowadays. Now, white privilege has existed for as long as white supremacy has, but a profound broadening and deepening of white privilege occurred in the aftermath of World War II with the suburbanization of the bulk of the white population. So suburban white privilege is supposed to operate as a circuit. So step one, go to college. Step two, get a good job with a high-paying salary. And step three, buy a house with all the lifetime of equity that represents. But this circuit is experiencing a malfunction on all fronts. I think it's impossible to understand phenomena like the Trump campaign or the Oregon militia without understanding this key dynamic embedded deep in the structure of white supremacy. Adjusted for inflation, the cost of tuition at public four-year colleges has increased by over 50% in the last 10 years. Student debt exceeds $1 trillion. And the official unemployment rate for white youth stands at 10.3%. Now, that's mild compared to the 20.7% that black youth face, but it's still double the overall white unemployment rate. 22% of jobs lost during the economic crisis paid between $9.48 and $13.33 an hour, but that represents 44% of the jobs created after the crisis. And so much for step three, right? There's sort of this political trope in discussion nowadays of the unemployed college grad living in their parents' basement, right? And so that describes, I think, a lot of us in the room, and it's a consequence of the structural shift in capitalism, global capitalism. So the last thing I want to say is that the unparalleled heroism of black resistance in this country, combined with the ideological clarity of the black radical tradition, has created a force and combines to create a force so powerful that it's able to draw in wide sectors of society, elements of all sectors of society. Unity under black revolutionary leadership, like Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition, has provoked the most frenzied response. So I hope that this panel can begin to identify the historical dynamics of white supremacy, as well as find the weaknesses that can be attacked so we can reclaim a future with justice and liberation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin Kelly.
Okay, good afternoon. I want to warn you a couple of things. One is I'm in terrible pain. I jacked up my neck, so I can't turn my head. But thanks to my brother, Russell Rickford, he gave me some Advil or something, so I should be okay. So we'll see. The other thing is that, this is a very exciting moment and a very exciting space. People who know me know that though my mind is on fire, it comes out as puffs of smoke. So if you want fire and brimstone, you're not going to get that. What you will get are some challenges, because that's what I do. It's not very popular, but I like to challenge because that's what I do. The other thing is I just want to acknowledge the fact that we are in the room with giants, real giants. Now, I know that's very unpopular and very sort of anti-radical thing to do in a world of horizontalism, but I have to say, people have been teaching me for years, Cornel West and Angela Davis, and Sonia Sanchez was here. My co-panelists are giants. Jamala Rogers, if you don't understand the Black Radical Congress, you don't know who Jamala Rogers is. My brother here, Umi Salah, I knew him when he was Prince. But, we met in Ferguson, of all places, and he is a tremendous leader. There's many giants I can mention, but I also want to pay special attention to one giant in particular for whom I think this whole conference is kind of dedicated, and that's Professor Anthony Montero. And he may or may not remember this, but when I was very, very young, I had no gray hair. I had no hair on my face, actually. He took me in. I came to some of those Saturday sessions at his house. I came to his house, and he schooled me. As I was trying to write about the Communist Party, he schooled me in philosophy in a way that no one ever did. And I was just telling Angela last night, I said, we don't, that kind of mentorship doesn't happen very often. where you just take people into your house and say, look, you need to read this, and read with love, critique with love, critique with love. You understand what I'm saying? And this is very, very important, because we sometimes think that critique is hating. Yeah. When in fact, I got critiqued by Professor Montero on Marxism. And that stays with me, the lessons that I learned. So I really appreciate that, all of it. Okay, so now I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes or so. So let me begin by saying we were reminded last night in those amazing lectures by Professor West and Professor Montero, and Professor West was on fire, that we have been challenging white supremacy from the beginning, from the transatlantic origins. So I'm not going to sit here and reconstruct that history. We know that. And we got a lesson on how far back it goes. Instead, what I want to do with the 10, 12 minutes I have is to focus on recent times. And I want to argue that the post-racial era that a lot of us joke about is no joke at all. But in fact, the latest manifestation of white supremacy. And I think, David Theo Goldberg has his book called Are We Post-Racial Yet? And I think he's right when he argues that the post-racial represents a neoliberalization of race, the upending of that brief period of multiculturalism and diversity, which we think of as the golden age, but I will argue it was not. Now, we all know that we know how Obama's election is held up as evidence of the post-racial era. And no one in this room really believes that that's true, that his election represents the post-racial era. At least most black people don't. But what most of us don't always challenge is the assertion that Obama's election represents the civil rights movement's crowning achievement. They may disagree with Obama, but they say, well, it's a crowning achievement. And then they will go back. They'll say Shirley Chisholm's campaign, Jesse Jackson's campaign, all these bids for Democratic nominations were the stepping stones on the long road toward progress. And then we say, well, Obama just disappointed us. I think that's not true. I think it's much deeper than that. On the one hand, there is some truth in the fact that the civil rights movement did help make his election possible by fighting to expand the electorate for all. We see this in the Chisholm campaigns and the Jackson campaigns, which in Jackson campaign, by the way, helped elect Bill Clinton, because all that voter registration made that possible. And Clinton, of course, was one of the worst disasters. On the other hand, what also secured Obama's election, however, was the very collapse of the movement, its retreat from the radical agenda of SNCC, of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, of the Negro American Labor Council, of the Civil Rights Congress, as well as the Black Panther Party, the National Welfare Rights Organization, and I could go on. And the destruction of the movement's radical elements was partly achieved by the very national security state our president has spent a lot of political capital to expand and defend. In other words, I want to argue that Obama's election and the emergence of a black neoliberal political class represents a betrayal of the principles basic to the black freedom movement, to the anti-war movement, to left feminist movements. Yeah. And so we're talking about a commander-in-chief famous for escalating drone warfare, targeted assassinations. I could go on. You know that story. We know that this is a president that oversees the largest secret domestic surveillance program in the U.S., who extended the National Defense Authorization Act, whose regime deported more undocumented workers than any previous administration before that, a regime that bailed out Wall Street while victims of the financial sector excesses lost their homes, jobs, and savings. We heard about that today. A regime whose Justice Department is now critical of militarizing local police departments had actually increased funding for the BURN program, which provides money for armored vehicles, SWAT armor, surveillance drones, helicopters, et cetera, to ramp up the war on drugs, right? My point is not to indict Obama the person. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice person. But to talk about the temporary, and I say temporary, I got to underscore that, the temporary defeat of the black radical movement, even as they attributed their ideology of colorblindness to the very movement they destroyed. But let's just jump back real quickly to 1963, the March on Washington. Again, by now, no one in this room really believes that that march was, about promoting a dream of black and white children playing together. At its core, it was about economic justice. Okay? The brainchild behind it both had roots in socialist and labor movements. Bayard Rustin, a veteran black labor leader, and A. Philip Randolph, who threatened a similar march 2 decades earlier. Randolph, in his rarely cited speech, warned, quote, "We have no future in a society in which 6 million black and white people are unemployed and millions more live in poverty. Nor is the goal of our civil rights revolution merely the passage of civil rights legislation. Yes, we want all public accommodations open to all citizens, but those accommodations will mean little to those who cannot afford to use them. Yes, we want a Fair Employment Practice Act, but what good will it do if profit-geared automation destroys the jobs of millions of workers, black and white?" Remember, in '63, violence was the major theme. And in fact, I would argue that state violence and vigilante violence is what brought most people to the movement. Think about the context. The context was in that spring, all those images of Ingram Park in Birmingham, and dogs and water hoses and basically a kind of local police force attacking black people. That was the image projected on television, the image that brought people to Washington, D.C. The murders of Herbert Lee and Medgar Evers in Mississippi, the attacks on voter registration activists. And keep in mind that August 28th wasn't picked by accident. August 28th was picked because it was the 8th anniversary of the murder of Emmett Till, right? So murder, death, violence was central. It wasn't just integrating, restaurants. So what happened to this vision of economic justice and ending state and vigilante violence? Well, several things. First, all the big groups, SDLC, CORE, the NAACP, the Urban League, they threw their energies almost entirely behind passing a watered-down civil rights bill and supporting a voting rights bill under President Johnson. In other words, they focused on influencing the Democratic Party. Second, the labor movement betrayed the coalition's racial justice agenda. Rank-and-file white members worried that the elimination of racial barriers to equal wages, access to skilled jobs, and unfettered access to housing would threaten their privileged status. Okay? And third, Randolph and other leaders deliberately excluded black women's organizations from playing any significant role in the movement. Why is that significant? Because this weakened the coalition, in part because activists like Pauli Murray, Anna Hedgeman, Dorothy Robinson, Dorothy Height had already committed to linking labor and economic justice questions to racial and gender equality. So you cut them out, then they're not going to be a central part of the ideology driving that agenda. But this did not mean it was the end of the radical position. On the contrary, in the decade following the March on Washington, many black organizations like SNCC and Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party not only embraced a program of economic justice, but went further, calling for the redistribution of wealth, reparations, workers' power, and an end to U.S. imperialism. Now, we think that this stuff is so new. This is like 1963. Many black organizations like SNCC and, in fact, let me just go back. In 1963, SNCC waged its Freedom Vote campaign in Mississippi. And we know about it. You see it in Eyes on the Prize. It's about people putting ballots that don't really mean anything except they're symbolic, supposedly. But what we don't always pay attention to was the platform. The platform of the Freedom Vote campaign included the right of labor to organize, the right of labor to engage in collective bargaining. This is Mississippi. A minimum wage of $1.25. Support for farm cooperatives in place of sharecropping and dispossession. The provision of low-interest loans for small farmers. A progressive land tax on tracts of land over 500 acres and a tax exemption for anyone with plots smaller than that. 5 years later, the same Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, who we think, if you watch enough documentaries, think died in 1964, had the most radical plank in the country. They're calling for guaranteed annual income, an extended daycare for poor and working mothers, comprehensive medical care for all, increased federal provisions for food stamp programs, free higher education. People talking about they want tuition reductions, free higher education for all, and an end to the draft, full military withdrawal from Vietnam, renewed diplomatic ties with Cuba and China, an arms embargo on South Africa and Israel. So, in other words, economic justice, self-defense, and protection from state and vigilante violence, racial and sexual violence, were key issues taken up by groups as diverse as the National Welfare Rights Organization, the Poor People's Campaign, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers Congress, the Young Lords, the Panthers, the Combahee River Collective, now the National Black Feminist Organization, the National Abortion Rights Action League, right? And whatever their flaws and contradictions, all these organizations and movements built on aspects of a radical democratic vision, which you can argue goes back to Reconstruction, but I don't have time to go into that right now. Meanwhile, as all these struggles against racial capitalism, war, and patriarchy are ramping up, there is a global slump in the 70s that opened the door for an expansion of neoliberal policies already being implemented in the Global South. And if you were here this morning for the amazing panel, Vijay Prashad laid out this story. And I'm not going to go into it, I don't need to repeat it, but if it's podcast, go check it out and read his book, The Poorer Nations. Read all his books, by the way, every single thing he's ever written.
That's right.
In the U.S., the economic crisis produced unemployment, trade deficits, deepened third world debt as well, and fueled capital flight. Workers responded in the 70s with a wave of strikes in this period, further justifying an attack on labor, as well as claims that capital needed to go places where there were no unions and less regulation. I mean, think about what it means in this age where unions are considered to be the villain. You know, a problem for it was always a problem for capital, but a problem for the workers themselves. And that wasn't the case in the 70s. It opens the door for privatizing public assets, for the devolution of the welfare state, for prison expansion, for remaking the tax code to benefit the rich. And of course, you got to keep in mind that this is not about Republicans. This is across the board. Carter administration, all of them. They pushed for tax reductions, they cut back on social spending, implemented austerity measures, expanded military presence, not just around the globe, but they also militarized the U.S. border with Mexico in this period. And other things which was talked about this morning. Finally, just to turn to one other thing, in response to resistance to racism, militarism, and an economic catastrophe in the 70s, and by the way, the 70s was one of the most dynamic periods of struggle. We don't think about that because we're convinced by, television that somehow everything ended in 1968. I don't know why that. Stop watching television. In any case, the U.S. was steadily selling the nation and the world this narrative that Obama repeats every chance he gets, and that is that America succeeded in dismantling Jim Crow. This is the post-civil rights era, that this is the great success, that we had racism and we got rid of it. Even if they say, well, we have racism, but now we don't have formal Jim Crow. But, so what ends up happening in the post-civil rights era is that in place of this narrative is multiculturalism. So remember that the original evidence was not Obama's election. The evidence that we reached a post-civil rights and post-racial era was not Obama's election, but the ruling class's embrace of multiculturalism, diversity, and inclusion. That is the language of racial liberalism from the 70s until now. Now, we often think of this as a victory, when it could be argued that it was part of the defeat of the movement. Multiculturalism and diversity policies and discourse do not disrupt white supremacy. They do not. Now, what is true is that they were responses to genuine struggles waged by the Black freedom movement and other oppressed groups in the 60s and 70s, but the adoption of diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism co-opted a radical movement demanding the complete transformation of the social order and the eradication of all forms of racial, gender, sexual, and class hierarchies. The point of liberal multiculturalism was not to address the historical legacies of racism, dispossession, and injustice, but to bring some people into the fold of a society no longer seen as racially unjust. What are the results? Well, we get Black elected officials and Black CEOs who help manage the great transfer of wealth to the rich, who oversee the continued erosion of the welfare state and the environment, the displacement and deterioration of Black and brown communities, and mass incarceration, and wage war on the planet. We heard this from Glenn Ford this morning. I don't need to repeat that. We're talking about breaking glass ceilings in corporate America while building more jail cells for the rest. Now, we also witnessed a shift away from a radical anti-capitalist critique to a politics of recognition. And I'm reminded of Adolph Reed's 1979 essay, Black Particularity Reconsidered, which demonstrated that the state and the dominant class had no problems incorporating black people into the existing state apparatus. A politics of recognition means the same. A politics of recognition means the right to same-sex marriage based on the same principles of marriage as a property relation. It also means the right of people of color, of women, of queer people to kill and torture around the world. That's not the politics that we want. A radical critique of racial capitalism requires going to the root in order to illuminate what is hidden from us. Structures of oppression are simply not visible. If they were visible, then it would be kind of easy to attack. If we argue, for example, that state violence is merely a manifestation of anti-blackness because that is what we see and feel, we are left with no theory of the state. And we have no way of understanding racialized police violence in places like Atlanta and Detroit, where most cops are black, unless we turn to some metaphysical explanations. What are the lessons? Well, we cannot wage an assault on white supremacy without fighting to end capitalism. And by capitalism, I mean everything. I mean its fetishism of commodities, its law of private property, its gendered logics, its bourgeois individualism, its culture, its state apparatus. Racial capitalism can and has conceded to demands for inclusion. But to paraphrase Malcolm, why should we want inclusion in a burning house? So when our movements demand recognition or think cultural competency training or more black authors in the curriculum or more black administrators or more black cops or more liberal education will dismantle white supremacy, they are sorely mistaken. Yes, the answer is that we still need to continue to fight, and that we will do. But we need new analyses that can get to the root of our oppressions as well as the possibility of its negation, which is to say our liberation. And to quote my comrade Vijay Prashad, quoting Amilcar Cabral, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. Thank you.
Radical greetings from Ferguson, Missouri. I want to thank the organizers of the conference, especially Brother Tony there, and I've heard so much about him, and it makes me think, is the Academy the only place where we're radicalizing our young people? And if it is, that's a sad commentary, because everybody doesn't get to go to college, y'all. So I'm glad that Robin went before me. We sort of had a powwow even online about how we wanted to do this. I really wanted to focus on our movement, because if we're going to fight anything, whether it's white supremacy, neoliberalism, capitalism, our movement's got to be something different. Our movement has got to be something stronger. And I can tell you, after Ferguson, we saw a lot. We experienced a lot. We felt a lot. And all of it wasn't good, y'all. So in some ways, we are moving, but we are still recuperating from some of the unprincipledness that dropped in on us, that is still usurping the energies of brothers and sisters who were there before August 9th, and they're going to be there after August 9th. And so those voices of young people have to be lifted up. And I'm actually prepared and more committed to doing that than I ever have been. The Ferguson effect often is referred to as policing not being able to do their jobs, that somehow they're now scared to police because they're under such public scrutiny. Well, we knew that was a lie in Ferguson because less than 2 weeks after Mike Brown was shot, Jimmy Powell was shot. And that was with the whole world, cameras and all, international media there. So we know that that's a crock. What I'm calling the Ferguson effect is the unapologetic way that not just young people, but black people are moving and grooving in all arenas. So I call the Ferguson effect the fact that black Rams players come out with hands up. That ain't never been done before. I'm calling the Ferguson effect the fact that Black Lives Matter activists snatch microphones out of the presidential candidates' hands. That's what I'm calling the Ferguson effect. I'm calling the Ferguson effect the fact that black folks in Chicago refused to stand down until they got the resignation of the police chief, corrupt as he was. That's the Ferguson effect for real, y'all. We are doing things and feeling things that we never felt before. And that's good. That's good. And we got to keep that going. And I know that sometimes this gets said in a historical way, that this is the only time we got to get it together. It's not. We've been here before. But this is certainly some exciting times that we're in. All kind of possibilities are opening up. And I really am proud to be a part of the movement right now. I was listening to Sister Africa, Pam Africa, and I really could feel something from her. And probably it's an age thing. This year is going to be like 50 years I've been in this movement. And I'm not saying that for accolades, because it ain't, my life ain't been no crystal stair, y'all. But what I am saying is that when you've been doing this for 50 years, you've seen a lot. You've seen our people suffer. You've seen death in the streets, literally people dying in the streets. You've been a part of the crack cocaine epidemic, which I call chemical warfare on our people. You witnessed, and not only you witnessed that, and this is the thing that I think we need to be mindful of, that you were a part of trying to steer some of that stuff. You were part of trying to save some lives. You were not a spectator in what was going on. And I think right now, some of us are spectators. I'm just going to bring it to you straight, y'all, because y'all didn't ask me to come all this way to bullshit you, right? So when I talk about the fact that we saw things in Ferguson, we felt things in Ferguson, some of that was learning stuff, that, some young people had never experienced before. They didn't think it was going to happen like that. They didn't think it was going to take that long to get the attention of the white supremacist government there. But there was so much that we did learn. There are so many young people who've been truly radicalized, and they are now coming in conflict with young people who have a different agenda. I'm just going to say it like that. So one of the things I've been challenging young people to do, and everybody to do, is to think about we are wanting to hold the folks in power accountable, but we don't hold ourselves accountable. Some of our organizations are mirroring some of these neoliberal organizations. And we don't see anything wrong with that. The only difference is we got a fancy radical sounding name on the door. But the same hierarchical, privileged staffing that goes on in corporate America goes down in those organizations. These are the organizations that are fighting for justice, y'all. How are we going to do that and win? How is the Black Lives Matter going to move forward when there's young women of color, black, trans, queer women, and when you start to acknowledge that, you hear grumblings from brothers that are supposed to be radical. Just because we have the rhetoric, the external trappings, a nice t-shirt, a mudcloth hat, doesn't mean that the same hegemonic toxins don't affect us. They do. And we, for some reason, don't feel like they do. So we've been struggling with some brothers around their misogyny for a long time. Why? We've been struggling with some of our anti-racist white allies for a long time. Why? A little call and response there, I like that. Yeah. That's the why that I think we gotta really delve into. Because if we don't do that, y'all, this is the vanguard. And I say this with no amount of blowing smoke up people's butts, but some of the smartest people I know are in the movement. They're in the movement, thank goodness. So why can't we figure this stuff out, y'all? It's because we don't take this stuff seriously. We don't take the fact that these folks got a plan, and they've been working their plan for a very long time. And I can say that because when I say 50 years, one of the things I remember is back in 1972, I did a congressional hearing for our first black congressman. And it was around disinvestment. It was around of our communities. We had come across something called the Team 4 plan that was supposed to be hidden, where there was concentrated disinvestment of parts of our communities, starting with major institutions like schools and hospitals. 40 years later, his son, who's a congressperson, asked me to testify at a hearing on the same damn thing. So they're moving ahead with a plan, y'all, but we seem to be in some kind of virtual loop here. And we got to get ourselves out of it. And we got to get out quick, because when we saw Ferguson, we saw what they had in store for us. We hadn't seen it before. We knew they had like guns. We didn't know they were coming out with MRAPs and drones and all of that. So now we know they ain't playing with us. So here are some of the questions that I really want to put forward for us to think about. Because I think, we doing this in love. Although I do tell some people, if you don't learn quick, we're going to move to the next level. But we got to do it in love, y'all. And sometimes we need to stay off Twitter when we're having our debates. Okay? I tell young people, you can't have a principled debate in 144 characters. You can't. 140. Okay, 140. I stand corrected. And I stand corrected by somebody whose organization did something different. And he didn't know I was going to say this, but I've already been talking about it. They did a social media blackout. Because what they were finding out was that they were spending more time with checking out who's liking their tweets and retweeting than fighting against patriarchy and capitalism. They were seeking virtual validation when our people are suffering. I really commend y'all for that. I'm serious. When I saw that, I'm like, a lot of times we do this broad brush stroke with the millenniums. I'm like, well, hold up. Well, here's an example. Here's something that's positive and good. A step back to say, what are we doing? What is our purpose here? Is this what it's all about? Because I don't care. If you got 5 million followers and they ain't doing jack, I'd rather have 100 people following me that are clear on their purpose and direction. So let's not get it twisted with Twitter, because they racist too, y'all. Check out how many black people work for them. So here's a question that we're going to think about while we're having this discussion. Where are the working class leaders that we are developing as a movement? there are at least 5 areas that our people are really suffering in. And these are called quality of life areas, where if you don't have them, your quality of life is going to be diminished. So when I look at the fact that the public education has been under attack for a while, but what's really left in public schools, I ain't talking about like charter and magnet and all of that. I'm talking about the real public schools are the kids that are coming from intergenerational chronic poverty, who've been abused sexually, physically, mentally, and physically. These are the kids that are crowded into a classroom to learn. I'm going to tell y'all that I don't see a black agenda there. I don't see black radicals there. I think the sister just talked about it, Reverend Pam, that she needs to see some of y'all. I don't see folks out there doing that. In the struggle for public health, most cities that we're in, there are no more public hospitals. Our people are dying, literally. There's no radical agenda for that. In terms of housing, of course, you can forget public housing. And you think about some place like New York City where on any given day, 60,000 people are homeless. That's a city, y'all. Y'all realize how many people that is? We don't have a radical agenda for that, y'all. Ain't no radicals up in there. When I say no, don't somebody say, oh, I know somebody that's doing housing work. I'm talking about en masse, we have no agenda in that area. When I think about the state repression, what organizations do we have that are fighting police terror? And even though we victimize every day and we being killed every 28 hours, Malcolm X grassroots people told us that, we still don't have an agenda, y'all. Even around mass incarceration. Don't y'all say, Sister Angela David, okay, that's one person. Where is our radical black agenda around mass incarceration? So we got some work, y'all. There's no radical agenda in those areas that we can be working in, that we can provide a framework for folks who are coming in. And we're seeing lots of folks come in new. They're saying, what should I do? Where should I go? But there's no theoretical framework for them, no radical guidance. The other questions. Where is the evidence of our organizing for political and economic power? And when I say that, I'm not just talking about the electoral arena. I'm talking about how are we organizing our people, working class people, for real power. It's not happening, y'all, not the way it should. Where is the popular or political education of the masses of people so that they aren't calling for more police, more surveillance cameras, or in some cases being part of the gentrification effort? That's education, y'all. If we're not doing that and tell people, no, we don't need any more cameras. We don't need surveillance cameras. That doesn't stop crime. All that's going to do is put Miss Angela's kids in the jail. This is what happened during the crack cocaine epidemic. When we said, we don't care what y'all do with them, just get them out of here. And they did. They did. Over 1 million of us in those cages now. The other couple of questions to think about is, where is the ability to not just hold the keepers of capitalism and the agents of capitalism accountable, but how do we hold individuals and organizations in our movement accountable? See, this is the stuff I'm talking about, y'all. We need some healing. That's okay. I'm secure. I'm just saying. We have issues because we live in America, y'all. And we need to recognize that. I don't think we need everybody running out there, y'all. I really don't. I'm just telling you from an old sister that knows danger. You need to stay in. So, when I'm talking about holding people accountable and letting people know that we're serious about what we say and do, more so what we do than what we say, then we don't have to worry about, is Brother Tony's job in jeopardy? We don't have to worry about if we have a progressive electoral person, whether or not he's going to catch hell or she's going to catch hell. You know, the universities they act like they radical and all for the democratic walls and all of that, but they're very repressive, y'all. So how can we protect? How are we going to protect the folks that are standing up for us? And we haven't done a good job of that. I just heard Brother Chris Rabb got fired a month ago from Temple. He thinks it's for organizing adjunct professors, but you know, folks, they can fire y'all at will, and they don't even have to tell you the reason. We also have people like Spike Lee that we haven't held accountable. So how are you going to go into Chicago to make a film about what's going in Chicago, and you haven't talked to the Black Youth Project, you haven't talked to the Interrupters, you haven't talked to none of those folks on the ground? He should have been ran up out of there. But again, folks know that we are not as organized as we need to be, and so they take advantage of that. We got to get it together, y'all. The last question is that I want us to think about is, why aren't we aggressively projecting our alternative vision to capitalism? We got somebody like Bernie Sanders talking about socialism, and we act like we're scared to talk about it. Still, we got an old white-haired man who's been consistently talking about socialism, and we still act like we're scared. So when we say shut shit down, I'm down. I'm all for that. I say that with the young people, shut shit down. Shut shit down. But then my question to them is, and replace it with what? Those are the opportunities that we got to talk about what life could be for black folks, for working people, for folks of color in this country. But we got to have the imagination. We got to have the imagination, and Robin Kelly talked about that in 2002 in his book. It's here, y'all. We are so constrained by individualism and all of the things that they are pushing on us, and we don't understand that it's clouding our vision, clouding our creativity, clouding our love for one another. We have to find ways to unpack that and really heal from the outside, from the inside out, rather. It's a lot going on, y'all. It is. I think those are the last things, but I know that young people are asking all the right questions when I'm traveling around. They're saying, where's the class analysis for the U.S.? Who's doing that? What's the historical analysis of this, that, and the other? They are asking the questions they want to know. And historically, it's been the black left that has provided those answers, that has provided that guidance, that has provided the theoretical framework. It has been the black left that has given leadership to the overall U.S. left. Yet, why we so in disarray here in this country as opposed to other left organizations and movements is because the black left is not as principled, is not as powerful, is not as disciplined as it could be and as it needs to be in this era right now. But y'all, it's so much ahead of us. It's so much ahead of us that's ready for us. And we got to get young people ready to take our places. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my young friend, Umi.
Thank you. Repeat after me. Power.
Power.
Transformation.
Transformation.
And miracles.
And miracles.
I want it.
I want it.
I need it.
I need it.
I got to have it.
I got to have it.
Right now.
Right now.
Power.
Power.
Transformation. And miracles. I want it. I need it. I got to have it. Right now. Right now. Right now. Repeat after me. Up ye mighty race. Accomplish what you will. Up ye mighty race. Accomplish what you will. Repeat after me. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. Oh, yeah. Now that last quote was from the great philosopher Aubrey Graham. Oh, God. Thank y'all for allowing me to be here. I come from the black church, and what that causes in me is an ability to be long-winded. But fear not. Be brief, brother, be brief. So my father used to always say. Also, I'm on a panel and in an event with luminaries. I told Brother Kelly, to prepare for this panel, I would read Brother Kelly. So that kind of set the paradigm for me about what to talk about today. The title of our panel today is Challenging White Supremacy, the Black Radical View. A richly wide-reaching prompt. As we live today in a world ever increasingly consumed by the oppressive views, beliefs, force, and power of ravenous white supremacy. As we have heard, white supremacy is a disease. It is recalcitrant. It is resistant to most forms of treatment. As with patriarchy and capitalism, it is a chameleon, a toxin able to infect its hosts silently, often misdiagnoses ego or religion, tradition, or ignorance. White supremacy is highly contagious. It has been known to be transmitted orally. In the venomous caustic cancer of the tongue, so watch your language. It has been known to be transmitted through skin-to-skin contact, in the loveless embrace, or in the domestic fist, or in the cold shoulder to the community. So watch everything you build and keep moist towelettes handy. I've even heard that it can be transmitted in the water and in the air and spread telepathically. I heard that if one happens to touch one afflicted with the illness and then one happens to rub one's eye, it can render one's vision distorted or blinded or even worse, colorblind. I've heard that this disease even attacks our dead, condemning and convicting our corpses guard the graves. You get the picture. White supremacy is a motherfucker. Alas, as Brothers West and Montero reminded us, it is one that the black radical tradition has wrestled with for centuries. And as this panel implies, it is a motherfucker that calls us, especially today, to remain ever vigilant and war ready. Today, I'd like to speak of a particularly pervasive symptom of white supremacy, a telltale sign of the sickness, vicious individualism, a uniquely Western epidemic and export. Individualism is the moral stance, political philosophy, ideology, or social outlook that emphasizes the moral worth of the individual. Individualists promote the exercise of one's goals and desires, and so value independence and self-reliance, putting the interests of the individual over precedence over the state or a social group, while opposing external influence upon one's interests by society or institutions, such as the government. Individualism makes the individual its focus, and so starts with the fundamental premise that the human individual is of primary importance in the struggle for liberation. This principle permeates patriarchal, capitalist, and white supremacist systems and is as American as the 99-cent McDonald's apple pie, which I happen to like. But I digress. So this afternoon, with this and vigilance in mind, I'd like to illuminate a place where this virtue of white supremacy flourishes right beneath our thumbs. I call this talk, No One Hand Should Have All That Power, or How Social Media May Not Be So Awesome and Popularizes White Supremacist Individualism. Our generation's relationship with social media is complicated, with many tensions and contradictions. This relationship is widely examined as a binary, and most analysis sides with its most positive elements, most heralded as the great connector and community constructor, the democratizer, the voice granter, and power builder of our age. But I disagree. The cooperative nature of this tool is widely exaggerated. Its importance inflated to proportions that threaten to cripple the next generation of liberation fighters. I posit that it has now become an asylum for neoliberal values, an arena where unchecked hate, dominance, farce, and individualism now flourish and threaten to doom our chance at building a mass collective movement of the people. We have reached a point where the hammer is being misrepresented as the house. And many of social media's most talented practitioners have preached embracing it as the pinnacle of representative power and solidarity at the expense of building real community and organization. We live in the age of uploaded avatars, insecurities, and weaknesses in the name of forming community. Social media coddles the individual's expectation for recognition and a false sense of connection through that recognition. Our tangible feelings are lost in the experience of impersonal expression. Even with the ability to reach others at the push of a button, we see many examples of where social media makes us hyper-acclimated to isolation and distance, the very antithesis of the Black radical tradition, the village. Thousands, maybe millions of young people are adopting the belief that movement visibility in social media not only guarantees destiny and victory, but also celebrity and awareness with deadly consequences to our movement. The indicators are seditious. Our movement is obsessed with doing the biggest, the most shared thing, and subconsciously lead ourselves into a war against our movement partners. Then there's the cynicism, the searching, the scrolling, and the beat of the thumbs against our devices that soon sour our vision and even influence our strategy. Put simply, we aren't fighting patriarchy, capitalism, or white supremacy. We are vying for virtual validation. This competition is intensely individualistic, apathetic, and naive to the joys of being fully present in a moment, to the sacrifice and commitment that it takes to build a powerful thing that contends with powerful things and transforms relationships to power and destiny. Let us question its distinction as the great democratizer. Unquestionably, it has opened the door for millions of marginalized to be heard and seen by allowing for the stories of scores of once invisible people to be elevated. That is a power previous generations could only hope for. Yet a true democracy weighs both the power of individual identity with the responsibility to the collective. There is no responsibility or accountability in the online arena, save for the Twitter feeding frenzies launched when someone goes afoul of the group thing. There is an anonymity that shields many from the repercussions of their lies and faux leadership, allowing for many to enjoy the fruits of freedom without the labor of accountability. It is this lack of responsibility to a collective, to a community, and unchecked liberalism even within our ranks that created the vacuum that the D. Ray McKessons of the world, individuals crowned leaders by white liberals with no base, no experience, and cobbled analysis, now occupy. His ascendance is the favorite American tale, the story of an individual who through snark and soundbite and brand alone can accrue the soft power of influence and online followers and the very real power to speak for black people. This narrative is happening on our watch and must be challenged. Millions of our youth are internalizing the notion that democracy is the ability to say and do as you please without the responsibility of consequences or to a greater collective than oneself. It is the right-wing pipe dream. A generation of black folk poised to ferociously defend individual liberties under the banners of freedom and democracy that is inherently individualistic and American. Our movement must attack this belief at every turn. Democracy and movement is work. It challenges selfishness and greed and is the building block for an alternative conception of society. We must think of our responsibilities to others in everything that we do and we build. The Black radical tradition has always been the champion here, and we must not allow subversive, anti-revolutionary personalities and misleaders to own this conversation any longer. Now to its merit as a great connector and community builder. One would be a fool to ignore the obvious, that social media is a virtual passport to places and people worlds away. But what we gain in long-distance connection, I fear we lose in close ones. We've all seen the signs: trains, planes, automobiles, restaurants, and parties filled with people with their eyes transfixed on their palms. Collections of people reduced to insular individuals locked in an ever-expanding digital universe. We find it easier to upload every corner of our consciousness to the web in the name of forming community. And yet we lack the energy and desire to engage in the beautiful Black energy around us. Even with this great collective weapon, here we find another example of it being used to make us intensely individual and incapable of empathy and the joys of this beautiful present. Movements and communities are built and sustained through deep personal relationships which challenge dominant narratives of success, opportunism, and supremacist tactics. Social media is a tool towards bringing and building transparent forms of relating and articulation, but cannot replace the work organizers must do in order to demonstrate other modes of positive radical communication. We must continue to challenge the notion. We must continue to create and imagine ways to resolve conflict and affirm each other's voices. We should challenge the notion that social media can do any more than serve as a gateway to organizing in the here and the now. Anything less than a strong on-the-ground accomplice to this virtual reality will surely doom this burgeoning moment nurtured and developed over time. We have to embrace this necessary truth or else fall victim to distraction and deception. Now, let's examine its position as a barometer of a movement's power. There are many definitions of power. To use a concept coined by political scientist Joseph Nye, I propose that social media is an expression of soft power. It is appealing and it is attractive. Culture becomes an ambassador and infiltrates where an individual can become a movement unto oneself without accountability or collective support. It attracts and co-opts instead of coercion. It is a process of lobbying through less transparent channels for political and non-political influence. Social media's power lays in how powerless people are, and society becomes more prone to control or persuasion. As organizers, contending with clear and present exertion of a hard power, the use of military and economic means to influence the behavior or interests of our people, we cannot grow comfortable here in our capable wielding of social media soft power. Our opposition relishes our reliance on inherently disconnected online tools and forums to measure, guide, and direct our movement. They crown online leaders. They tried us for a minute, with the obvious goal of co-optation and the subversive goal of teaching our people that those individuals with millions of followers are the drivers of change. More telling, many crowned leaders openly advocate against building grassroots organizations in lieu of online engagement and refuge. More sinister, there is a growing fear amongst many liberal circles to contend with and grasp power. This fear has evolved into outright aversion. This activity reveals itself in the actions by many to the direct action tactics of Black Lives Matter and can only be described as counter-revolutionary and anti-movement. Soul is produced through struggle and a resistance to live and become not through the passive witnessing of spectacle and speaking. There is a warmth in our intimacy and sincerity that can only be mocked online, but can never be fully replicated or experienced. Soul is made through the tension of life's obstacles and one's many methods of overcoming. It is what feeds and nourishes us. Now, this analysis comes from personal reflection. For quite some time, social media was my hall of mirrors, judge and jury to my every action and every movement. It inebriated my ego and courted my insecurities. I was off-center. My self-perception was self-curated online. If you didn't agree with me, I just unfollowed you, dog. Without it, I began to recognize the little things, the tiny triumphs coming to comfort me in the dark times. I recognized my most vicarious nature, how I use my timeline to escape the stress, isolation, or perceived shortcomings of a present moment. I looked in the mirror and saw my deep desire to be known, remembered, valued. I recognized the lengths I would go to keep hold of social media's illusionary embrace. I was passively skeptical of every performance of resistance I saw on my timeline. Human actions became perverted caricatures. Maybe it was the act of putting the phone face down that forced me to see the people in front of me. Or maybe the silencing of all the commenting that made me listen to the actual voices around me. I could hear my voice more clearly. It was a fasting of the spirit. I was no longer overwhelmed with news feeds of death, pain, politics, and posturing, at least for the time being. I gained some solace from the numbness and cynicism growing from the constant posts on my timeline. I became more connected to the people around me. I actively participated more in everyday events. There was a newness again. I was reunited with the time before we knew what everyone ate, who everyone loved, where they vacationed, how their day went, all before meeting them. I was meeting people outside of other people's interest in them. There was a warmth returned to me again. There was an empathy returned to me again. How many of you all know it's unnatural to watch people die every day? How many of you all know it's unnatural for a human being to scroll past pictures that we see every day? You know, 4 years ago, I'm from West Inglewood, Chicago, arguably the worst part of the murder capital of the country. And the first time I saw somebody die was in 2005 when I watched the death of Martin Lee Anderson at the hands of prison guards. And it shook me. It's the reason that I'm a part of any movement today. What I saw almost 10 years ago when I went into a room of other college activists and realized that there was a murderous regime running our state, and that they would kill somebody and say that it was because of medical causes, a spontaneous spurring of sickle cell anemia, that Negro disease that no one knew he had until that very moment, but we captured it on tape, 6 grown men beating a young child to death. And almost 10 years ago, that fucked my day up, that fucked my life up. And now 10 years later, we could scroll by it, right? 10 years later, you could say, I saw that video already. 10 years later, you could see a child on the beach and keep it moving. Empathy is dying, right? And so we've got to work. We've got to work to rescue a generation that knows what death looks like and is comfortable with it. Because without empathy, we can't build a movement. So what is our duty as a movement in challenging this? We must build organizations, actions, and practices that have mass educational appeal. Is that a phone? It's an old school phone. And also transform intimate relational presence or engagement. Our movement must return the collective to its rightful place in our analysis, practice, and vision for a better tomorrow. I encourage our community organizers towards true exhibitions of democracy, community, power, and the collective, not fellowship and diffusions of responsibility. We must ferociously challenge the notion that any one of us is more important than all of us. We must re-embrace the great strategic value in everyone not knowing everything you do, when you do it, and whom you do it with. A side note, we have been conditioned to be complicit in compromising our best strategies, delivering all of our plans publicly. We must envision new strategies in this surveillance state reality. Do some misinformation. Tag yourself somewhere and then leave your phone and then go somewhere else. Just mess them all the way up. Right? Just say, oh, I'm with Angela Davis in the crib. She's not here, but just mess them up. We must wrest our movement from the clutches of individualism and the false message of microwave movement. A movement can be educated and invigorated online, but never built there. A true movement is one based on deep relationships that can withstand the winds of trend. We have all watched cyber solidarity and camaraderie drown in the shallow waters of online connections. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. Building relationships with people requires being present. Nothing, no amount of speeches, witty tweets, shirts, appearances, protest pictures with your fist up can replace that. And we know because we tried. We did all of them. We combined them all. I had a shirt with a tweet, with my fist up. We did it all. It ain't what it is. Dr. King speaks from the grave. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. I challenge us all to bask in the magic of the here and now. Reserve precious moments for only your memory. Implore our communities to reunite with all of their many selves, not just the avatar with the most likes. We must remind our movement of the magic of collective community. We must get lost in conversation with our innermost thoughts and idiosyncrasies. We must seek out the whys and the how-longs and once again be amazed and a little bit embarrassed at ourselves. We must remember a time where love was a warm embrace, liberation a hot meal with comrades in the kitchen and a song in the heart, and victory more than headlines. Then and only then will we challenge subversive cyber white supremacy and truly hold a united future in the palm of our hands.
Wow, that was amazing. So just in that spirit of collectiveness and collective analysis, before we open it up to question and answer, I just want to give the panelists a chance to respond to anything else that their co-panelists raised or ask any questions. Or do you all just want to get right to the question and answer? Yeah, thank you, Brandon.
Hi. This question is for Professor Kelly. A lot of the panelists this weekend have talked about the labor movement as a vehicle for radical politics historically. I was just wondering if you could say something about the role of white supremacy within the labor movement.
Oh. In how many hours? I mean, you know, because we have a lot of things to cover. Just very, very briefly, whites. If you think about the history of the labor movement going back to the 19th century, at least in the United States, white supremacy has been central, as Du Bois calls it. Whiteness is a wage that buys off elements of the white working class. And so, if we go back to the example I gave, specifically of the betrayal of, like the UAW, for example, UAW gave money to the civil rights movement, but in some ways, UAW did betray, the kind of radical politics that the League of Revolutionary Black Workers had laid out that was actually leading black and white and all other workers on the shop floor. But ultimately, too many white workers, not all, buy into the wages of whiteness, the idea that you can get slightly bit more or protect your seniority at the job in exchange, for keeping wages low for other people of color who are not white and keeping your wages just slightly higher. What we've witnessed, though, and this is a tragedy, is the dismantling of the labor movement for the most part since the 1970s crisis, with no corresponding improvement in the condition of white workers. And still, they're convinced that somehow predominantly black-led labor organizations are not in the interests of white workers. So that's where that's just one of many examples in which white supremacy works to undermine the possibility of labor solidarity. Black working class leaders have been at the forefront of pushing for multiracial organizing from the get-go. And this is something that was raised last night by Professor Montero and Professor West, and was raised this morning as well when Vijay Prashad talks about the communist tradition.
If you're not done answering, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right, I got a question. I'm Kevin Porsche. I'm from LA, urban city. There we go. So, as y'all know, most of us growing up, we don't really have good representatives, good role models. And I'm glad you're up there, bro, because you're not too much further off from I am. You're a little older, so you get it. And I'm at the spot where I can still understand being younger, and I can understand being both. But I want to learn how to apply both. So I can talk to younger people, I can talk to older people, but I want to learn how to apply. So this is my question. Where do we turn to look for? Because I get a lot of answers, but where do we turn to look for these right representatives? I do go to church. I'm part of my church family, and they're great. But not all of my homies, all my friends, we're from broken up families. We don't have that church. We don't have that father. We don't have that backbone. And I just want to know, where can we turn to? Like, where can my friends turn to? That's not music. That's not trap. That's not these terrible movies. You know what I'm saying? That we can actually turn to for positive role model, positive mentors. You know what I'm saying? I know as a young person, we get influenced real easily by the wrong things, but what can I tell, my old high school to pay attention to a little bit more? You know what I'm saying?
Maybe we can get 2 more questions. Brandon, the woman in purple to your right.
So I just want to give a shout out to Black Youth Project for inspiring having black-centered spaces in the face of white supremacy and being unapologetically black. So I want to know how we can really center black folks and also people of color in the face of white supremacy. And I would also just like to ask the audience during this conference that as a white person, that to stand in solidarity with people of color and black folks, that you give up your seats to black and people of color who are in that secondary room.
And then maybe Erica, and then we can get the responses from the question panelists. Erica. Sorry, we're going to...
Okay, so I'm glad that she spoke to what white people should look like and how they should operate in black spaces, because my question is, do we think it's possible for us to draft or redefine what an ally or an accomplice and what it's supposed to look like? Because oftentimes we still find in these spaces that even though we have white folks that stand in solidarity, they still have a sense of entitlement that they refuse to address. And that they really don't understand what privilege and entitlement, what it looks like, because they are white, and they think because we are economically aligned that they still don't understand that we are not the same because I'm brown and they're white. No, I still have another question. The other question that I had was specifically around the cries of a woman. We stood here today and we heard a poem about what it means to see a black woman smile, but what does it mean to hear a black woman cry? We heard the screams of a black woman out there, and we have been maintained by white supremacy to be desensitized to the cries. And me as a black woman, as a mother, I'm emotionally at a heightened state within the movement and in my space at home. because I'm tired of hearing the cries of black and brown people and nobody doing nothing. We saw the videos of a young woman being tossed out of her seat. Where was the cries in these spaces? And the fact that we heard someone out there, nobody moved, hardly anybody moved. Hardly nobody moved. And just because we have black people that look like us and fight for us does not mean that they are defending us in the way that we need to be defended. I don't care what their religious background is or not, but when we hear a black woman cry, we need to run. We need to shut shit down, and we need to put stuff on hold, and we need to figure out what the problem is.
Yeah, just good.
Oh, right here.
Hi. Dr. Kelly, we've been hearing the word radical all weekend, and it's a very loaded word. I think it's a multidimensional word, and a word that you can hear 10 people say it and mean 10 different things. And I was wondering if you could talk about the meaning of the word radical so that we can develop a shared definition of it within the context of the Black radical tradition.
Yeah, let's get down here and then Ishmael after that.
Hello. I just have a question. I feel like we talk about white supremacy a lot and imperialism and capitalism, but it's very violent. It's 2015, and I'm still seeing my brown and black sisters in a stage of Toni Morrison characters of Pecola and Carly Breedlove. The radical tradition of white, liberal white, radical white, whatever, is violence. Are we ever going to shift the narrative and dialogue to violence, to militancy? Because to talk about white supremacy and not talk about violence is just very privileged of, well, I don't care if you're black, white, Asian, whatever. To sit here and be so privileged in these seats when people are across the street who are, souls are eradicated by white supremacy, who have the capacity and I guess who have the whatever to sit in these seats, but who will never be here because of white supremacy. So I'm not sure if anyone ever saw the movie The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Yeah. When will those dialogues start happening? That's what I want to know, because this is very liberal. This whole conference is very liberal to me.
Ishmael in the back.
Hi. My name is Ishmael Jimenez. I am a teacher of African American history for the School District of Philadelphia. Thank you. And I really appreciate this opportunity to even ask this question. On a daily basis, teaching high school students nowadays, sometimes I always feel like, my children are lost and my heroes are dead. And it's hard to kind of teach students about white supremacy when it's so embedded within their lifestyles. In high school, thank the Lord, most of the time the students can wrap their mind around it after some deconstructing their mentalities, but for the most part, that's a long conversation. Nobody got time for that. So how do we address structural white supremacy on a larger scale rather than just saying the system of white supremacy? Because right there, already people's eyes done glazed over. The bigger question is, how can we really attack and address white supremacy in a way that is effective? Because we can learn from the past. I'm an African American history teacher. I know all about, not everything, but I know a lot about what has been done. And even with the Black Lives Matter movement now and everything that's going on, I'm seeing already how easily it's going to be co-opted if it isn't already co-opted. And already, our Google searches and our 300 times a day on camera and the national security state that we live in, how do we attack white supremacy within that context effectively? And that's my question.
I think we've had some people down here waiting for a while.
Hi. This question is in direct response to something that Mama Jamala said, but you said that grassroots organizations are resembling neoliberal organizations, and I'm curious as to how we resist the neoliberalization of Black radical grassroots organizations and stay true to the Black radical tradition in our efforts to organize working class people in particular.
And then in the middle.
Thank you all for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us and all. When we come to gatherings like this, I always ask the question, what is the planning and the strategy afterwards? Because you have all this energy and all of us coming here for one accord and one cause, but yet still, when the close of this conference takes place, there is no planning strategy afterwards. And the sister, Jamala from Missouri, I apologize if I pronounce your name improperly. Right. Please forgive me. What you said as far as you were asking questions in regards to, things of, well, these are some actions we should be mobilizing around, but yet still nothing's being done. I always say, inside these walls, everybody's here on one accord and is really following on the same train of thought. But once we walk outside these doors, then it's like it goes everywhere. So, at a conference such as this, with, giants, and we stand on the shoulders of giants who have all brought us together, what is next? Because there has to be a next. Otherwise, you're going to have more conferences with no action that takes place. I am a father of 3 children. I set the example daily of what manhood's supposed to look like. I am the support to my wife, and she can do whatever it is that she wants to do. Because I don't play any games at all. So, I have to let them know there is hope. But what can be done afterwards? I mean, where are we going from here?
One more question, Walter.
Hi, my name's Sheena. I'm a seminary student at Princeton Theological Seminary, and I left a job that's supposed to be about organizing to go into faith practice because I'm very concerned about the intersection of faith, justice, and healing. And what I want to hear from our speakers is, how are we lifting up not only the importance, but the practice of centering our work in healing to address the trauma that our people experience while we're fighting? Even our military state will send people out to fight, and when they realize you may not be dead, but you're too broken to fight, they will take you home and care for you. So how are we doing more than that within our movement?
So now let's give our panelists a chance to respond.
Before I answer some of the questions, I just was asked to briefly say something about the incident that happened. First of all, I think we should respect the organizers of this conference and the way that they set it up. And so we just finished Kwanzaa, and one of the Kwanzaa principles, which is not just for 7 days out of the year, it's for all of the days, and that is to believe in all your heart and, the righteousness of our struggle and in our leaders. And so folks who put this on said that when you register, it's first come, first served. That's what was said. And so I understand people's concerns, and I think the organizers do too, about folks getting up their seats. That's what that argument was about outside. It wasn't about somebody was in distress. I understand it, but what I'm saying is that folks who are here are here. And here, and there's empty seats that black folks could come in. So, okay. But that's what it was about. It wasn't that somebody was getting beat up or whatever. Somebody got animated about the fact that the policy that's in place that they disagree with. So I just want to speak to the brother who asked about, and a couple of comments about how do we organize and, what is radicalness in part of the being in part of the Black Radical Congress. We define radical being getting to the roots, getting to the roots. So a lot of what we see now, I think, is what's turning a lot of working class people off is the superficiality of our movement, because they're still suffering. We got all of the trappings, as I said, and we got lots of high-powered militant rhetoric, but their lives are still the same. are basically still the same. Even with Obama in office, their lives are still the same. In some cases, they've actually gotten worse. So when it comes to organizing, I mentioned 5 areas that we need to be looking at: education, healthcare, housing, employment, particularly low-wage workers, the state apparatus. I mean, it's a plethora of places for us to organize. But I think some of it goes back to what Umi said about what we think organizing is. And we've had to have discussions about this in Ferguson. Protesting and organizing is not the same thing. They're two functions. So organizing comes out of an analysis, political analysis, and out of that flows a strategy, and out of that flows a work plan. It's scientific. It's nothing that I made up. This is what has been done for years. This is why the SNCC workers did it. And when you try to circumvent it, you don't get the outcome that you want to get. It's just like baking bread. You can sit up there and say, that's old school stuff what y'all did. I'm going to leave the yeast out. Okay. Leave the yeast out. When that sucker don't rise, you cannot call it bread. So what I'm saying is that we got to get into our communities, not as some privileged missionary saviors, but as folks who are willing and able and committed to be side by side with the very folks who are at the point of hostility and suffering. Okay? It sounds simple, but it ain't. Because first of all, some of us are scared to go into those communities. Let's just be clear. Let's be clear. Because I've seen folks damn near run out of there when we canvases and stuff, like looking all around, trying to... So first of all, you got to understand that these folks are human beings. We talked earlier about loving one another. These folks are in pain. They don't need folks coming in and out, promising stuff, even not just elected officials, but folks that are like got the rhetoric. They don't need none of that. They've heard it before. That's why I don't even want to come out. They don't want to participate. They don't want to vote. I don't blame them. What's changing for them? But we got to do something different. And some of that means we got to be connecting with the folks who, they got answers. They ain't stupid, y'all. We ain't stupid. So my thing is, find you an organization that's doing that kind of work, not organizing each other. You know, one group is organizing another group, and then you come to an event. I'm talking about doing some deep down organizing to build power for people so that they can take their own destiny in their hands. That's what I'm talking about.
Ditto that to everything Jamala said. In addition, the brother that asked about the role models, I think there's a part of my belief that the role model is another unique American concept. Part of it, you know, that there's a one person who exudes all the values that you should follow, their path, their leadership, and their tutelage. Now, I don't think that that's all that it is, and I'm not saying that's all that it is, but I don't know if I could name someone for you based on someone who I think is dope and doing amazing shit, you know. So I don't know if I could recommend a role model. What I would try to recommend is a culture that people can look up to, right? A language, a practice, a way of relating to one another, a way of expressing love for one another, a way of vigorous study, a way of vigorous discipline that someone can look up to. So no matter who they point at in the crowd of whatever organization or whatever squad you have, that is a person who, you know, could reflect something that someone could aspire to. And then kind of a connection to that, in addition to everything Jamala said in the question about organizations. And I think one thing Sierra Taylor, one of our organizers, introduced this to us, and it's really just gotten us all going crazy. Dream Defenders is going through a process of collective reevaluation of everything that we've ever done, and luckily I believe we're coming out of that process towards the middle of the year with a reorganization of our organization. And I think I would recommend that for anybody who's a part of an organization. Every 2 to 3 years, there should be a full revolution in that thing and a reevaluation of your role and whether it's still relevant and needed and whether you all are playing a role in supporting people. But she brought to us that our organization is an alternative institution. And so every practice should be examined copiously with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that the rhetoric that you espouse is actually something that you may not even have to teach. They know it by coming to the first 3 meetings. You know, just as you have a home and you say, take your shoes off when you come in the house, you know, that teaches a few things about how you like your house. You know, that one practice belies maybe a deep theoretical analysis about the holiness of your house, right? And so practice is a big part of how you can build those things. To speak to what we're doing, the women in our organization, Sharika Shaw, our organizer, Sierra Taylor, Rachel Gilmer, Kimberly have formed a women's faction in our organization to examine every practice that we've ever had and to inform a corresponding men's circle to evaluate the effects of patriarchy and how we can embed and do better. Because we, as I said, we are not perfect, right? We're just experts in our failures, and that's all I can really hit you with. So this is something that is a place where we're evaluating our practices, our hierarchical structures, the way decisions are made, who makes decisions, what is the strategy by which informs and filters all of the decisions, all of that. So it's not just who gets to talk in meetings, and which is very important, but it's also deeper than all of that. So that's what I will offer. It's a culture, a language, a practice.
Right. That's enough. So let me just add both my complete agreement with what both Jamala and Umi said, and also point out that you just heard 2 examples of what radical means. 2 examples, and that is several things. One, to go to the root. That is absolutely true. This is the Marxist definition of radical, to go to the root. It also means going to the root is to constantly, ruthlessly criticize. I have this wonderful quote that Marx says, the criticism, he says, you have that, I'm speaking of a ruthless criticism of everything existing, ruthless in 2 senses. The criticism must not be afraid of its own conclusions, nor of conflict with the powers that be. Mm-hmm. Now, when you actually examine contradictions is not a bad thing. Contradictions are passageways to revealing something. Mm-hmm. And so that means that your analysis cannot stay still.
Right. And
this idea, it's a strange thing when, that's why I don't like doing these panels. I don't like them, and I'll tell you why I don't like them, because there's this thing where you produce the head and the body.
Right.
And somehow we're supposed to kind of take the questions that say, where do we do now? What do we do? Our job's not to answer that question. That's what struggle does. All of our job is to answer that question. And so you just heard 2 examples of how movements actually do that. That it's constant self-criticism, interrogation, time, place, conditions, analysis. It never stays the same. That's dialectics. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 101. That's basic. And so in some ways, to be really radical in that sense is to think dialectically. Mm-hmm. Now, there are other definitions of radical. I mean, Malcolm X had one. If you ever listen to his debate at Oxford, he talks about being an extremist, and he recognizes that in that definition, extremists could be left, but extremists could be right too. So you're going to hear radical as a way to talk about the extreme right. Okay, that may not be our definition, but I'm saying that's another one. The other thing I just want to just two quick things, or one quick thing, and that is the issue of trauma. And I'm of many minds of this, and I know that after I say what I'm about to say, you'll never speak to me again. But I have to speak truth. There's no question that this generation in particular, this younger generation, has experienced what has been generations of trauma. Trauma is just the way of black life. In other words, we've been traumatized from being kidnapped and we know all that. There's not a moment that's more traumatic than others. In fact, in terms of police killings, there's no more police killings now than there were 25, 30 years ago, right? It's all traumatic. I get that, but what's also worse is that you're also a generation that only knows war, right? You're talking about wars, wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Of course, we've known wars, we've known covert wars, we've known invasions, but you grew up with war. You also grow up in a world with websites like World Star Hip Hop, where people will watch things and see violence and be inured to it, but you're never inured to it, it affects you. Yep. It really does affect you. You're not desensitized, we believe you're desensitized, and they're training you to go into the military by all the video games that all these young kids play, not you, but they're preparing you to wage war, right? So I don't have any doubt that trauma, however, having said that, I think the language of trauma can easily slip into thinking of ourselves as victims rather than agents. And when we do see ourselves as agents for change, we end up, sometimes we are traumatized by this idea that anti-blackness is so fundamental that all other struggles don't mean anything, don't matter. And so that when we're agents for change, we don't necessarily always, again, this may be a unique audience, but in terms of the students that I'm dealing with, they're like, I don't really care about Palestine because anti-blackness is the thing that's most important. Well, even if that's the truth, our tradition was no matter what, where there is suffering, we stand. Where there's oppression, we resist. That's where we come from. I don't care. That's where we come from. It's always been that way. And I don't want to change that tradition. That is the black radical tradition. Who brought free public education to the United States? Black people.
Yes.
For black people? No, for everybody. For everybody. You see? So that's the tradition we need to engage. And in fact, when we call ourselves black bodies and not people, we're traumatizing ourselves. We can't do that anymore. We have to go beyond that. So all I'm saying is that we have to remember traditions of love. Dr. Cornel West has been telling us this forever. And we don't always listen to him. I'm sorry. We don't pay attention. He's been saying love is central. If you want to know, okay, now I'm going to put myself out there. Part of my critique, I have to say, of Ta-Nehisi Coates' wonderful book in many ways, is that there is not the tradition of love there. Why is that? Because it is in some ways about trauma and damage. And people identify with that because they see themselves in this idea that there's really no hope and no possibility. But James Baldwin, when he wrote The Fire Next Time, it was all about love. Yes. You have to read that book. And I'm saying, if we loved ourselves in the way that Dr. West is telling us to love ourselves, if we remember that, we would never reduce ourselves to bodies. We'd be people and agents because the future is in our hands. No matter what, the future is in our hands. And so, one last thing. Sean Ginwright wrote this book called The Black Youth Rising, Activism and Racial Radical Healing. It's a great book. Because what Sean argues, I don't know who Sean is. I've never met Sean. I just know the book. But I do know that what the book argues is that organizing is part of the healing that we need to do. Right? So if you really feel traumatized, join an organization, and make movement.
I'm like the whole thing. So, Robin.
I want to push back on Robin a bit because I just actually had this conversation and Sean was in the room. So, Sean Jenwright. So, one of the things I think might be helpful for you to embrace trauma more is to look at it from a sociological point of view, but from a political point of view. Because I was in a room with a woman, a white woman, who said she did not think that we should be using the word trauma for the very reason that you did. And I told her I disagree with that because my people need to know why they're acting the way they're acting. That is not their fault, that there is a system, most of it fairly invisible, that they don't even understand or know about and don't know why they're responding that way. The way they are responding is totally natural to that environment. So one of the things that Sean Jenwright put forward, because I was talking about post-traumatic stress and some of the work that even around post-slavery stress, and the phrase that Sean put forward that he uses in the book is persistent traumatic stress environment. Now, to me, that captures what I think it really is, because every day we're getting beat down with it and don't understand it. And so when I read out of the folks who are in social work know this book, but it's that diagnostic DM whatever book. Yeah. So I took out of that book the indicators of behavior for post-traumatic stress. And I would read it to folks and say, does this sound like somebody you know in your family, or teachers would be there, say somebody in your classroom? They all recognize that those kind of behaviors, but they don't know, they don't have a framework for it. And I'm contending and challenging us to look at trauma in a political sense and not in a sociological sense, because then it does like, oh, let's do this. No, we need to change the system that's creating the trauma. Not give drugs, because that's what you do on the sociological. We got layers of trauma, and we need to understand that and know that the way that we are behaving, even towards one another, sometimes is even out of our control. And that's the other thing that the DMSB talks about. It talks about sometimes you're doing stuff and you don't even know why you did it.
Can I offer one thing that could possibly, in my mind, it offers a bridge, but we should think maybe of trauma as a diagnosis and not a prognosis, right? So it is a diagnosis of the issue, but not an inalienable state that we always move in. So it is a diagnosis of very real and present danger, and what has created the conditions for all of the ailments and all of the perversions that exhibit themselves when you put people on top of one another, when you take away everything that that need to survive. But it is not a prognosis. It is not an eternal function of us to be.
I get it. I agree.